Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. My guest on this episode of Writers at Work is Sara Paretsky, a legendary author in the world of crime fiction and beyond. Her stories featuring V.I. Warshawski opened the door with a new form of detective novel featuring an independent, relentless, and thoroughly human woman who owed very little to the dark, macho world of the private eyes who dominated that form of storytelling. Pay Dirt, her latest and 22nd novel featuring Warshawski, finds her character leaving Chicago and tackling a crime in a place and among people she hardly knows. And as always, law enforcement is displeased by her presence. Sara is the recipient of the Grand Masters Award from the Mystery Writers of America and the Cartier Diamond Dagger Award from the Crime Writers Association, both for a lifetime of achievements in her field. It's an honor to speak with Sara about what she does so well. Sara Paretsky, welcome to Writers at Work.
It's great to be with you, Jim. Thanks.
Sara, I was reviewing the essay you wrote for the 30th anniversary edition of Indemnity Only, your debut novel published in 1982. Of Warshawski, you said, "She wasn't Philip Marlowe in drag. She was like me and my friends, doing work that hadn't existed for women when we were growing up. She didn't care what people thought of her and didn't worry about getting fired." So back then you had this fully realized character, but you had some trouble presenting her in the novel form. Is that correct?
She came to life in the first novel. I hadn't written about her in any other form, but it was very hard to find a publisher for her. And I was lucky to be starting at the time when there were many independent houses to go to in New York to look at a book. I have 40 rejection letters filed with my papers at the Newberry Library, including my favorite, which was that a book set in Chicago had regional interest only, and that not enough people in the Midwest read books to make it worthwhile to publish a book set there.
Oh, my goodness. So I've had this completely backwards, Sara, because in other words, Vic came to life as you were writing her.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
fantastic. That is fantastic. So you already had your chops as a writer.
Well, that depends on what you call chops. I worked in publicity, and so I did a lot of speech writing, a lot of newsletter writing. I worked for a small company in the late 60s, early 70s that presented information on how to implement Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, we sent newsletters to businesses, and I was in charge of writing and producing one of those. But I had not written fiction for publication until I wrote Indemnity Only.
Do you remember how many drafts you did?
Not as many as I do now of my books, which is kind of strange. I had many lucky breaks that made this book happen. I don't think I would have finished it, let alone found a publisher for it, if it hadn't been for Stu Kaminsky. I don't know if that name still means anything to crime writers and readers, but Stu had a bunch of series, one with Toby Peters, a Hollywood detective in the 1940s. He taught film at Northwestern University. While I was struggling to write Indemnity Only, he actually offered a class in night school called Writing Detective Fiction for Publication. I signed up for it, and he was enormously helpful in helping me shape the character, make her more current. I was relying on a lot of 30s and 40s tropes from the heyday of the hard-boiled novel. So that was an incredible piece of good fortune. He gave me kind of the boost and the courage I needed to finish the book. But I still have the first draft that he went through and commented on, and it's very different from what the finished novel was. So I think there were probably 3 drafts altogether. And then Stu sent it to his agent, who remains to this day my agent, Dominic Abel. and Dominic had additional requests for changes. So the fourth draft, I guess you could say, is what got published.
Yeah. You say something in that essay I mentioned earlier that I found so honest and refreshing. You write, if I were creating a VI with the greater confidence I have now, she wouldn't be slotted so completely in the noir detective's profile. I interpret that as when you were writing more freely, as you gained more confidence in your writing, you were able to bring out nuanced characteristics in her.
Yes, and also in just in the whole context of her life. For instance, the big thing to me that I think of with that is that I made her an orphan, and uh, the hard-boiled detective is a painful loner without close ties, and I just felt so little confidence in my voice and my vision that I followed that.
Yeah.
If I were going to start today, I'd give her a family. Her mother would still be alive. There'd be a different dynamic. She idolizes and idealizes her mother, but that isn't how we, especially how we women, relate to our mothers. Even if we love them and adore them, there's stress points and conflict points that would make for richer stories.
She's so easy to be with, though. She's dogged. She won't be denied. The worst people oppose her. Uh, she will get the job done. But she says in Pay Dirt that she's not a superhero. She's not a robot. She's of the real world. And what you've created, Sarah, I think is something very difficult to create, which is an empathetic character. I mean,
That's a great compliment. Thank you so much, Jim.
well, it's truthful because I'm concerned about her.
Well, that's nice.
I want it to turn out okay for her.
So she's on vacation right now. She just there were too many hits in Pay Dirt, and I was trying to dial it back and give her an easier ride. And my editor at Mara was like, "No, people expect VI to take her months." So VI is doing. She's living my dream right now. She's in Sardinia.
She is okay.
Eating goat cheese, drinking red wine, getting massages, swimming in the Aegean or Mediterranean, whatever sea it is.
I'm glad to hear
I'm
this.
working on a book about a completely different character.
You are.
Yeah. Um, it's a woman named Lily. She's a retired CIA agent. She's my age. She's in her 70s. And she's on the run from the agency because she's being way too forthright about some of the things that the agency did when she was in the field.
My goodness.
While VI is recovering from Pay Dirt, poor Lily is now in the spotlight.
Well, I wonder if you'll be able to achieve with Lily what you do with VI, and that is, as a reader, I find myself really relishing the periods in between the action, which is really not supposed to be what happens in these kind of books, right? Uh, you know, when VI is taking on some terrible guys and there's a terrible action scene, or she comes upon something horrible, that's one sort of thing. But I find myself really engaged in those periods in between. And I think that's often the most difficult parts to write. When such moments come, uh, do you say to yourself, what would Vic do here? I mean, do you have that kind of relationship with her?
What I really say is, I think of it like a piece of music where you can't constantly be at your most intense or you lose your listener. Um, and I think of someone like Beethoven, where you have a dramatic climax, but then you have an interlude that lets you recover from the climax. And I, I think that that's what I need.
Right.
And so that's what you learn from other writers. You learn good things and you learn not so good things, or you learn things to avoid. And since crime fiction thrillers, that's still, even now, and I keep thinking, oh, there are all these important books out there about politics and race and economics and everything, the climate, and I should be reading those. But really, secretly, there I am in bed with William Shaw, the British crime writer, whom I love his work, and he's not known enough in this country. So I have his most recent book that I had to order from England because he's not published here. And that's really what I'm reading, even though my bedside stack is all the big important books.
I want to go back to this point, Sarah, and I'm not trying to be overly flattering, but those are some of my favorite moments in your books, those interludes, as you say, because that's when you really reveal who she is and her self-doubts and how the good life is just a little bit out of reach for her. And
Right.
and they're not easy to write. And so I say it again, I really enjoy that part.
Well, I don't do it that consciously now. I hope I don't become self-conscious as
Oh
I'm
gosh,
writing.
I hope
But
not.
that's a very meaningful compliment, but also something for me to take away as I'm working on Lily, because I'm having trouble making Lily come to life in my head. I can see the action, but I'm having trouble making her someone that I want to read about. Um,
Yeah, I mean when Vi does her laundry, I'm right there. I because I don't know that Marlowe did his laundry. You know what I mean?
right.
Anyway, okay, back to the point. Um, Regarding Overboard, which came out in 2022, the narrative dredges up her past via reunions with some dreadful people. But what I found interesting is you're writing about life during the pandemic. You handle it with such aplomb. There's no hysterics, just life in Chicago with another unexpected challenge, which is COVID, which happens to be a terrible, fatal challenge. Did you have any hesitation about writing about the pandemic in that period?
I didn't have hesitation about it specifically. I mean, well, generically, what I struggled with is since my books are always keyed off things that are happening in the world around me, which is just because that's how I'm thinking, not because I'm going out and looking for it. But it's really important that you keep remembering that we're in a rapidly changing landscape and that what you're writing at is with a specific slice of time. And so you don't want to um I can't think of the right word for it. You don't want to imagine that this is what's going to be going on forever. But you
Right.
have to, I felt I needed to include the pandemic because that was affecting everyone's lives at the point. But I was trying hard not to have that be like, this is how we're always going to be. And in fact, it's amazing to me how quickly we stopped uh, having that be the center of our conversation. It's like lockdown ended, we struggled for a while to, but not that long a while.
That's why I think Overboard has a historical resonance that's truer than some of the hysterical stories we see about the most terrible aspects of COVID. And of course, there were so many terrible aspects. But most people I know just figured out some way to go about their lives. And your character does that. She's she's cautious and she makes sure that she's not uh, putting anybody else at risk, but she goes about her life. And I think that book is gonna stick around for a while. Uh,
Well, I'm glad to know that. I will say I got some extremely angry letters from readers over VI wanting to have people masked around her. Um, I got my favorite insult actually was I was called a libtard, um, which I love it because it makes me think that I'm a liberal in a leotard. My my childhood dream was to be a ballerina, and I was and remain somewhat ungainly on the dance floor, and as a child, I was quite chubby. and so my dream of being Margaret Fontaine or Alicia Alonso in that long line of my body, there I am, a liberal in a leotard.
There you are. So coming up to Pay Dirt now, this is a different Warshawski than we're used to. She's suffering from a PTSD from an incident that mostly occurs off stage for the reader and hampered by self-doubt. Yet once again, we're fully engaged with her reaction. Um, how, how did you decide to have the story be set somewhere other than Chicago, and to have her so discombobulated? Discombobulated. She's really not herself. How did you come to make those decisions?
The first one was the easy one. I had a I had my backstory about the roots of the crime being set in Kansas during the period immediately after the Civil War. I grew up in Kansas and grew up, we celebrated the centennial of Kansas coming into the Union as a free state. We celebrated the centennial of the town of Lawrence, which is where I grew up or grew up near. And then as an adult, I'm learning these kind of shocking things about how white Kansans behaved in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. Like the Delaware Nation really helped the abolitionists, and they helped support the Union cause when the fighting came to Kansas during the war itself. As soon as the war was over, these abolitionists forcibly ejected the Delaware Nation from the Lawrence area, sent them to Oklahoma, stole their land. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, this is like learning that your father was some kind of terrible criminal.
Oh
You
my.
idealize this history, and then you find out that there was another part of that story which was ugly. So that was driving me to create the crime that underlies the narrative itself. I wanted to do it in Kansas. I could have done it in Chicago because there's no place that you couldn't have that story take place. But Chicago, there's just so many different ways to hide property, to things get torn down, burnt, built over. In a more rural setting, it would be easier to do the tracking that she has to do. And so that decision, that was an easy one. Moving her there, that was hard. It's not the first time she's been in Kansas, but it's very hard for me to visualize her in a different location. She's just so, in my head, she's wedded to Chicago. So that I struggled with that for quite a long time as I was working on what became 8 different drafts of this novel. So Indemnity Only was easy.
Yes.
Pay Dirt was hard, but no, both were hard in their different ways. But the self-doubt, this is where my head has been for a long time now. I really think since losing my husband almost 6 years ago, he was kind of my anchor, my person who thought that what I did was worthwhile, and kept me going through periods of doubt. And somehow over the years since losing him, it's just gotten harder. Overboard was Deadland was the book that I wrote while he was dying and after he died. And then Overboard, the pandemic, kind of in a perverse way, there was more energy because we were all dealing with this crisis. But Pay Dirt, I just felt really naked and alone. And poor VI had to reflect that, I guess. And so I had to come up with something. For me, it's just, I don't know, situational angst, I suppose you could say. But for her, it had to be, because she isn't like that. She's not like me. She is take charge, problem solve. But I needed her for my own working out my own issues, I guess. I needed to put her through that kind of torment. And I think that's also why I now it's the third time I've taken a break from her over the 40 years I've been writing about her. So I know I'll come back to her, but I need to be away from her for a book to let her become the person that she has to be in the world and in my life, the person who's confident and can take on difficult problems.
In the writing of Hey Dirt, Sarah, do you feel that you worked out those issues, that you found some way to live with these thoughts and feelings?
To some extent, I don't know, Virginia Woolf was always trying to work out her difficult issues in her books, and she kept diaries, which I don't. I spasmodically keep a journal, but not the way she did. And she always thought this book will solve this issue about whatever was in her life, and obviously that didn't work for her, and I'm not sure it does work for anyone, but to some extent, yeah, just giving VI a way forward through it, and there were little ways through it. That pendant to the ancient Sumerian goddess that I had her lover make for her that she's wearing, and that then comes back to complete the book. I think it's a help in anyone's life to just have some external icon that gives you a picture of where you need your life to be or want your life to be, and kind of helps ground you.
Yeah. What I one thing I found so true about her reaction to the world around her is her reaction to societal bias against older women. And she's older and she's not at all interested in what younger women are doing. You know, she she is confronted by young people assessing her by their standards. That one obnoxious boy says to her, "You're not just old and ugly, you're crazy."
Right,
And she's not old and she's not ugly and she's not crazy.
right,
But from his adolescent mind, he says those things to her. And what I find so and just wonderful is she just moves on right through it. It doesn't affect her at all.
right.
She has a mission and she's going to do it. And she knows who she is, even in a terrible situation that she's suffering with this PTSD. She knows who she is.
Yeah, I think that's what she does for me. That I know I don't think of her as a real person. I know she's a creature of my mind, but she's a creature of the part of my mind that how I aspire to live my life. And so she does that for me. She keeps showing me, or how I write about her keeps coming back. This is where I want to be. And maybe I think if I were a person of enormous self-confidence, taking charge, blah, 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 I wouldn't be writing to begin with. I would just be out, I'd be out doing something in the world. But but I am a more introspective, self-tormenting kind of person who also wants to be active, and writing about her gives me a way of seeing both of those things.
Well, Sarah, with that, I want to say thank you for joining us at Writers at Work. I loved reading the books, and I'm so happy to have this time with you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jim.
Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersaTworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.